Corruption Watch is marking 10 years of activism, not only investigating reports of corruption or referring those that it can't to government and other activist organizations to take further action. The sector demanding the most attention was policing, ranging from abuse of authority like using state resources to exert pressure on or use of violence against civilians in a dereliction of duty where police personnel failed to act upon complaints against their own. It has been a long road for them. Let's check in with them on what the last decade has meant in terms of its own growth and focus and how the next 10 are likely to shape the organization. Corruption Watch Executive Director Karam Singh is with me now. Good afternoon, Karam, and happy birthday. It's been a busy and intense decade, I'm sure, given the many body blows corruption has dealt to the body of South Africa's institutions and citizens. As you sit back and reflect, what stands out the most for you over the last decade?
Well, I think just establishing an organization that could last 10 years is probably the thing that jumps out at me the most. There was a bit of a groundswell in 2012 that we needed a civil society response to what was seen as an emerging, a deepening corruption challenge. But I don't think in 2012 that we could have fully imagined that we would be entering into an era of what we've come to know as state capture, where we saw actually, organized at the highest level of the state, collusion between leaders and politicians and private families to basically loot the state and the fiscus of resources for private gain. So I suppose there was some vision with Corruption Watch being launched, but we couldn't have imagined how much worse things were going to get over this period.
Yeah, we'll talk about how you'll evolve then, over the next 10, given some of the problems that you highlight as you reflect over the last 10 years. And in the opening, I referenced how problematic the policing sector has been in terms of alleged corruption. Share some insights as to why that is the case.
I think police continues to be a vexed area because it really is the place where common people, citizens, the people of this country have a direct interaction, a direct interface with the state and with state power. So the types of allegations we've seen, range from abuse of power, the classic kind of petty corruption situation of when you get stopped by a traffic officer and you're asked to pay for cool drink money to, more sophisticated type of corruption, such as the procurement types of allegations, which we've seen across the public sector. So I think we've seen it with the comments from the new National Police Commissioner, that there's a recognition that the police has gone backwards in many ways, that it's not fulfilling its democratic obligations and democratic mandate. And it really remains, one of the key vulnerabilities within the state to continued corruption, fraud, and maladministration.
Given the complexity of corruption in South Africa, we can be forgiven for describing or designing the anatomy of corruption in South Africa with, on the basis of data. But I wonder if you have a comment as Corruption Watch in your conversations around what the psychological effect of these constant reports, these constant experiences are in the minds and in the behaviors of South Africans.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's something that we're looking into more. Also, trying to understand some of the lessons from international comparative jurisdictions. But certainly, there is a fear that there is some fatigue out there, and that there's both the growing cynicism and to a certain extent some defeatism in terms of thinking about what we can do to fight corruption. So, for instance, something that's been on the table for a long time is the establishment of an independent anti-corruption agency. This has been a major gap we've seen since the dissolution of the Scorpions. But, you speak to people, state officials, politicians, and you get a sense that, there's a fear about the possibility of building a real, empowered, skilled institution that's commensurate to fight corruption. And I think that defeatism and that cynicism comes from the fact that our existing institutions of state have struggled so much. So, we see the MPA limping along. We've spoken about the police. We see a parliament, for instance, which doesn't fulfill its oversight mandate. So, the Constitution creates quite a high bar in terms of what's expected of democratic institutions, of institutions like the Human Rights Commission, like the Public Protector and others. So, going forward, I think we're going to need to overcome the psychological damage which has happened as a result of corruption and overcome that cynicism and that defeatism and really have the courage to try to fulfill the promise of the Constitution. Yeah,
there's such a high price attached to corruption in all of its layers. I mean, you think about the whistleblowers too. They experience a mixed fate of persecution, sometimes death in South Africa. Does our context, Karam, and our reality support those who risk their lives in coming forward? Is South Africa safe for others to come forward?
I think at the moment it would be a bit cavalier to say that it's completely safe. We have a legal system which protects disclosures. We've got something called the Protected Disclosures Act, but we don't actually have a legal regime or culture in place to protect those individuals. So we know that whistleblowers get harassed. We know that whistleblowers lose their jobs. We know that whistleblowers in extreme cases get assassinated. What's our response as a society? What are we doing to protect whistleblowers? What are we doing to incentivize whistleblowers going forward so that they know that if they come forward with protected disclosures, that they're not going to get bogged down into a legal battle, which is going to bleed them dry. So we do absolutely need a culture shift. It's good that at this moment we're seeing a lot of talk, a lot of recognition to the role that whistleblowers play in the fight against corruption. President Ramaphosa himself has echoed those sentiments in the State of the Nation and in his closing remarks at the ZONDO Commission. But we, as a society, as a culture, we need to do a lot more to protect whistleblowers, understanding that they're really a pillar in the fight against corruption.
You referenced ZONDO. Do the findings and recommendations of the ZONDO Commission finally move the needle when it comes to the pursuit of accountability from those responsible for the state capture assault on our constitutional democracy?
Not yet. They move the needle. They move the needle in terms of transparency. They move the needle in terms of giving us a historical record about what happened, who was responsible, and what the vulnerabilities were. But the issue of accountability now, it lies beyond the mandate of the Commission to these institutions we were talking about, to the police to finalize investigations, to the Special Investigating Unit to recover stolen assets, and to the NPA to prosecute criminal conduct, and to the ruling party to exercise its step-aside resolution. I heard your conversation earlier about Batabile Dlamini. We need to see the ANC come to the party now and really give life to the findings and recommendations of the ZONDO Commission. So the work of the ZONDO Commission in and of itself doesn't give us yet that accountability that we seek.
Karam, I'm almost hesitant to ask the next question that I prepared for you because, it's almost with the dreaded anticipation of what your response might be. But the ZONDO report laid bare the grotesque anatomy of corruption in our country, and can we ever recover?
Oh, I think we can. I think we can recover. But again, recovering involves a psychological journey of overcoming that cynicism and overcoming that defeatism. But we just need to continue to breathe life into our democratic institutions. Some can say, 20, 25 plus years into democracy, that we're slipping behind, that we're not as a progressive society that cares for the weak and the vulnerable in the way that we should. But certainly the principles are still in place. The rule of law is still in place. We have a judiciary which is independent. We have a media which is independent. So we do have some of the building blocks required. We're not at this moment sliding into some kind of authoritarianism, but we need to leverage the democratic dispensation, the democratic gains that we have now to really push the fight against corruption and move the needle, as you say.
I mean, because I love reports. I love reports where, we get our marks on how well we're doing and get our public image. Because if we talk about the Corruption Perceptions Index, it doesn't look good at all. We saw that in January. It was released by Transparency International, and we came somewhere close to the middle, scoring 44 out of 100. So 180 countries they look at according to its perceived levels of public sector corruption. 0 highly corrupt, 100 is very clean. We're at 44. We're near the middle. Is our government on the path and honestly speaking now, to decisively rooting out and even preventing corruption?
Not to decisively rooting out and preventing corruption. We're on a path, but the path from our perspective is quite sluggish. The progress is slow. The next big step would be the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Council, what's called the NACAC, which is envisioned as part of the rollout of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. And then that body should then provide guidance to giving life to the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. But where have we heard a speech from any member of cabinet, from the president himself, saying that the rollout and the implementation of our National Anti-Corruption Strategy is an absolute priority of government? We're going to provide absolutely the required resources required to prosecute corruption, to reform the police. We need that constant refrain from government. Rather, we see it sort of periodically come at times of crisis. So no, at the moment, we're not seeing decisive action, and we're not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
Karam, thank you for your time this afternoon. Appreciate it. Karam Singh is the Executive Director of Corruption Watch. Let's take a look now at our top story.